Good morning, everyone. We would like to welcome you to this GMA webinar on code enforcement. We thank you for your willingness to attend this webinar, and we hope that you will find the information presented informative and helpful in your day-to-day activities. This webinar is being recorded and will be placed on the GMA website so that those who are unable to attend today will be able to view the webinar at their leisure. All participants are muted this morning. This will prevent some audio feedback issues that we've experienced in the past. We do encourage you to submit questions that you might have for our panelists. This can be done using the questions dialog box in the webinar control panel on the right side of your screen. During the presentation, I will ask our panelists some of these questions that are asked. Also, during the presentation, you may see a poll pop up on your screen. If you see this, please respond quickly, as we will likely only allow the poll to remain for about 30 seconds. Sammy Rich is the Assistant City Manager in the City of Rome, and we are pleased to have him with us today as our panelist to discuss some code enforcement issues. At this time, I will turn the presentation over to him.
Great. Thank you, Corey. Good morning, everyone. And I would like to first say good morning from Rome, and thank you all for joining me via webinar. I do hope our technology is going to work correctly because as anyone who has ever done presentations knows, technology is great until you have someone watching, and then things tend to go awry. So with that, we'll try to get the technology moving forward here. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our model in Rome and Floyd County. Many of you probably know that we are not a consolidated government. However, we do like to tell folks that outside of the actual consolidated governments in the state, we feel like we probably have more intergovernmental agreements than any other community. And so that's one of the areas that has really allowed us to increase efficiencies. And so within our planning, zoning, building, GIS, code enforcement, all of those agencies are consolidated. They are all technically city employees, but we do provide service countywide to all of Floyd County. So I'll show you a little demonstration of what that organization chart actually looks like. Specifically looking at code enforcement today, of course, we're going to talk about some of what are the symptoms, some of those things that we have to deal with. And I suspect a lot of what I'm going to show you, you guys are probably going to be familiar with within your community. And then ultimately, what are some of those solutions that we have found to be productive in our community? So again, I mentioned our consolidated model. For those of you who haven't been to downtown Rome, I would welcome you to come by and visit our Carnegie building, a former Carnegie library. That's what we refer to as our one-stop shopping area. And so within the Carnegie, you're going to find everything zoning, building, planning related to get your day started. So as I mentioned, we pride ourselves on this model. And so what's before you is simply our organizational chart that depicts how we function here. As Assistant City Manager, one of my responsibilities is to oversee the planning and building, of course. I'm getting a pop-up here, so bear with me. Okay, sorry about the interruption. And so looking at within our building inspection office specifically, we're a pretty small shop considering we provide service to about 96,000 residents in 514 square miles. And so as many of you know, we're all literally doing more, and we're doing it with less in times of economic downturn. And so that's just been an ongoing challenge. But looking at our office, specifically looking at the left of the screen under Howard Gibson, our Chief Building Official, you will see our breakdown. And again, it's a pretty small shop with 4 inspectors. With slow times, we're able to focus more on code enforcement. When building ramps up, we're, of course, going to need to hire a few more building inspectors. But until then, things seem to be going well. So code enforcement and blight. And so the big question, does your city or does your community suffer from blight? And having been around various parts of the state, it's hard to go to any community and not see some things that we as governmental leaders would like to improve upon. And so simply overgrown lots. Many of you have probably experienced what overgrown lots may look like, and hopefully not next door to you. Rubbish and garbage, boy, that's a very common characteristic. Illegal dumping has certainly been a problem within our community for a number of years. Junk cars, I'm going to talk about that in a little more detail. And then simply old houses. Part of the story of Rome is an old community. We were founded in 1834, and Rome grew up early on as a thriving community at the intersection or at the confluence of two rivers. And so because of that, the population developed early on, and the downfall of that is that we've got a lot of older homes that has allowed for an older housing stock. And so the unfortunate part of that is they don't always get taken care of as well as we would like. And so unfortunately, we've been given too few examples. So boarded up houses, this is also symptomatic. You have vibrant communities, older communities, new communities, young communities, and anytime a home becomes boarded up, it certainly draws attention. It creates a lot of ill will toward those owners, and unfortunately it can lead to decline in the neighborhoods. So another symptom. So solutions, what do we do? Where do we go? How do we, how do we solve some of these problems? So classic clean it or lean it. A lot of folks, a lot of communities, I'd be surprised many of you did not have some form of an official clean it or lean it program. And this is the classic case of a complaint comes in, Mr. Smith, your lot's overgrown. We'd appreciate you doing something there. Mr. Smith doesn't respond. Ultimately, the city crew would go out with would perform whatever maintenance, cut the lawn, perhaps haul off rubbish, and we would literally place the lien against the property. At some point, there's a transaction on the property, and the city may or may not collect what had been charged against our cost of delivering the service. And so that was pretty standard. Probably, again, a lot of communities have some form of clean it or lean it available. And so really moving forward for us, and we'll talk about this in some greater detail, when you're looking for the tools, what is it that allows you to do something other? And that's where we got to what we refer to as the IPMC, and that's our International Property Maintenance Code, and of course the International Residential Code, and the difference is pretty clear. The IRC, the International Residential Code, is simply the technical specifications. If you're going to go and build or you're going to go and repair, then you've got to follow what's in those building codes. The Property Maintenance Code, that's the tool that we use to address blight. And so it's an interesting ordinance, and it has a lot of detail. And so I would first tell you that in the and again, your mileage will vary, but a lot of times when I'm talking to folks, and especially looking at city governments and city councils and city commissions, at the end of the day, there's always the question of what do we want to do? And my response is usually we can do anything. It's a question of what is the political will. And so do you have blight in your community? Do you have problems you want to clean up? And so there are tools available, and these are the tools. Do you have the political will in your community to go and adopt the ordinance and then to empower your employees to carry it out? That is literally where the rubber meets the road. So again, moving on, IPMC, that's our code for maintaining the property, safe working condition. And then again, the International Residential Code, that's our technical code that really dictates the specifics. How do you repair this? What's the spacing? What's the electrical, et cetera. So for us, again, I mentioned earlier, we were being an older community, having more opportunity for housing to be in decline. Code enforcement, again, back probably 10 to 15 years ago, we would have been on a typical clean it, lean it mission, and we may have condemned, if you will, nailed up the big red signs, and ended up ultimately bringing in a bulldozer. And so we probably were somewhere on the order of 100 to 150 homes a year that would have gone through that our old process, if you will, of starting at nailing up the red signs, and certainly that would get attention within the community and would bring on the phone calls and the questions, and occasionally we would find a property owner to discuss many times, as you all know, that's one of the bigger challenges is finding who that person is. And so going through the provisions of our code, and really this goes back to 07 for us, it really declares and dictates the specifics of what we can do. And so I'm not going to read this in depth or in detail. You all can see on the screen, but often when we talk about the property maintenance and what I tell folks, it's very, very comprehensive. And so a specific thing, is screens on windows, protective coatings on exterior wood that, as we know, if it's not finished, if it's not sealed and painted, it's going to lead to decay and ultimately rot, and eventually it's going to lead down the road to further action. Overgrown lots, garbage, rubbish, all of those things, the cars sitting in the front yard. So all of those are things that we are allowed to work with and work on. And again, here's a list: the junk motor vehicles, houses that are in decline, and and again, it's not lost upon us that we're in a tough economy. There's a lot of folks that are barely hanging on. We have a population that certain areas that are certainly in decline, and we recognize that. And so it's not to say that you can't enforce and implement these programs without compassion. And I'll talk a little about some of the things that we do to counteract that. So again, vacant, dilapidated houses, attractive nuisances, drug crimes, prostitution. So the list goes on, as you can imagine. So I'm going to show you just I've got several photo examples, but things that are lurking, especially in weeds. And the slide there, the photo to your left, the Rollingwood, one of the nicer subdivisions. And so folks often don't assume that things can go wrong in your upper neighborhoods, but unfortunately, when times are bad, people lose jobs, and they are out and about, and property becomes overgrown. Hidden dangers, sheds and buildings, those are pretty typical. More rubbish, more household garbage where we have illegal dumping that goes on. Junk motor vehicles, and a word of caution, this, surprisingly, junk motor vehicles is an area that is, they often say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And so we got Uncle Larry's old car on the left, and we all have seen those stories to where Uncle Larry left the car, maybe there's some sentimental value attached, and for whatever reason, the owner doesn't want to get rid of it. And they're meaning to. They're going to do this, they're going to do that. Then we have the entrepreneur, and so this is the guy that he's going to buy the cars, he's going to fix them up, he's going to flip them. But of course, in the meantime, you end up with a scene like this, to where you've got a half dozen cars stacked deep in the yard, may or may not be pulling engines out. And so aside from the zoning issue, and of course clearly in some cases that would be a zoning violation, what you end up with are a bunch of cars that may not be registered, and it's one of those long-term assets. And I grew up a car guy, so this is an interesting subject, because I can certainly appreciate somebody that has the old 57 Chevy sitting out back that they're planning to restore, but it's the Impala sitting out front on blocks that they intend to restore that typically get the neighborhood calls coming in. And so again, going back to the maintenance code, vehicles being in the yard that aren't registered, don't have a current registration, don't have current insurance on them, we are able to go in and deal with those through the abatement process. So talk about housing in decline. These are some actual examples from different parts of our community, old apartment complexes that really decline over the years, and the owners are just simply not willing to invest the money to maintain those. Again, more of the same. You will also notice that from an attraction of crime, the graffiti, and so we all know that work in this business, a house that sits vacant can certainly attract some undesirables. Attractive nuisances, this is also a popular destination, and we've labeled that haunted house. And so the big house down at the corner, next thing you know, all the kids are telling the ghost stories, and they are inclined to go and visit, and of course that's certainly a nuisance and dangers waiting to happen. Burned out homes where families have literally abandoned the property. And then, of course, there's the thing that nobody wants to think about of what goes on behind the closed doors, and certainly I would think any community could happen upon some of these type discoveries to where it's literally needles and there's drug paraphernalia, and so when you think of the question of why as a community is this important, why would I want to do something besides from the economic impact, from the value of housing in decline, it from the attractive nuisance perspective is who would want this kind of stuff going on in their neighborhood or within an adjacent neighborhood. We get into the code issues, and so as I mentioned earlier, the property maintenance allows us to be as specific as windows, functional, operable windows, screening, painted windows, and stairs, decks, no railing. That's kind of your classic code violations to where no chance a building permit had been issued. There's been no inspections. Foundational issues, cracks where animals can get in, roofs being dilapidated, and that's a tough situation where you've got a resident on a fixed income, and they develop a roof leak, and unfortunately, instead of working on the problem, they end up putting pots and pans out, and so we've certainly seen some of that. Exterior, again, you name it, we've seen it, where houses are crumbling. Photo on the right, you can see the floor joist is, it's not a house you'd want to get in and do some jumping jacks in, to say the least. Interior, again, ceilings dilapidated, pervious surface not so much, and so these are some of those the good, bad, and ugly photos. A classic example here of work that is done without a building permit, and unfortunately they removed a load-bearing wall in this particular case, and so we see it all. More electrical hazards. The electrical is probably one of the more common issues that we get to deal with in the code enforcement world, and where it's not uncommon that where you have the old style circuit breakers, you will find a piece of copper tubing. Somebody, if the breaker if it blew the fuse, and we'll fix that, we'll just put a piece of copper pipe in it. So we occasionally happen upon those. Electrical, again, the wiring, the exposed wiring, the exposed wire rubbing on the fascia board, waiting on that's a fire hazard waiting to happen. So some of the things that we see that we get into. The photo on the left, we'll talk a little more about this, but that's actually a crawl space of an apartment complex, and I'm pretty sure you could have scuba dive. You could put on the scuba diving gear and got in the crawl space. Wouldn't necessarily recommend that, but this was an apartment complex that was completely occupied with about 30, and in this case it's 30 Hispanic families within our South Rome community. So plumbing issues, there's obviously maintenance that does not always get taken care of, and so which leads to deterioration. The mechanical side, again, hot water heaters, one of the more common things that permits are skipped out on, and occasionally you will have a jackleg, as we refer to some of the folks that can't necessarily do everything they think they can in the building world, and that leads to fire hazards, etc. Then again, copper theft. I'm sure your community is not, hopefully you've not seen as much as we have, but we have a lot of abandoned properties that have been stripped of any inch of copper, any inch of whether it's plumbing and or electrical wire. And so then just classic vandalism with kids and the BB guns and or the homeless population that decide they want to have some ventilation. So looking at some of those what I call really the worst case areas, some really ugly things. And I mentioned we were on a track of probably anywhere from 100 to 200 houses a year that we were having to demolish. And of course, when the economy is going great, when the funds are flowing in and we're okay to cash flow some of the cost of legal fees and demolition, it's not such a problem. But for most of us that are, we're doing more, literally more with less, tax revenues are down, we struggle to make ends meet. And so to be able to spend the $3,500 to $5,000 a house just in demolition cost, well, those days are pretty much gone. And so it's few or far between now that we're able to just decide and go in. And so we kind of do that as a break glass if necessary. And so I would, a couple of photos here just to point out. You will see the track hoe, and then at least the house on the right, you'll notice the big sign on the door. And so not a very uncommon sight in our community in demolishing homes. So getting a little into, kind of our process, how do we go now? And I will tell folks that, it's hard to be in this business and not be compassionate. And where there's a challenge, and I alluded to this a little earlier, is when you have a sensitive population where you have seniors living on a fixed income, and they are literally doing the best they can do. And it's tough to send a code enforcement officer out and to have that officer, go and inspect based on a complaint, and they end up finding some violations. And then that's where you've got little Miss Smith, who may be 80, lived there 50 years, and she's on a fixed income. And so those are tough. And I will tell you, one of the things that we do to help in situations like that is our minor repair and our moderate repair program that we house within our community development department. And I'm hopeful that some of you all have similar programs to where there is an alternative, and it's where it's not just the government, if you will, that shows up with the big stick to make some compliance, but to where we do have some solutions. And and again, a lot of folks are resourceful to where when we run into those situations to where somebody that they're literally doing the best they can, we really do try to find a way to help. And so we do take on the role of we're going to attract more bees with honey. And so we have been successful with that. Both our minor repair and moderate repair, those are obviously grant-funded programs. We have a part-time employee that administers those, and she is paid from the grant. And so it's been a very big success, and it's something that's been very, very popular for our city commission. This is just one of those areas that's good to provide some help. So that's something that we have in our toolbox to help us. And so again, we take the what I call the soft hand approach. It's rare that we end up in court for someone that's trying to do the right thing, but we do. And so within our municipal court, we set aside one court day a month, and we have deemed that our environmental court. And so those are the cases that we're talking about today. Those are all heard at environmental court. And so we've had some success in trying to lump those together so that we handle them as a whole. We have a city attorney who is there to represent and help with the caseload. And of course, our code enforcement officers have become really, really versed in the legal process, if you will. And so they've been very successful. But in looking at our normal process, it's you don't always go out and issue the notice of violation. It's usually we've been working with a property sometimes 30, sometimes 60 days before there's ever an issuance of the notice of violation. And so that's where, when we talk about the political will, again, this is some of this is my advice. If we're out and we're issuing a notice, it's typically because we've tried to be the good guys and it didn't work for whatever reason. And so the only way to get real attention or to get action is to issue the notice of violation. And so within that, so notice is issued, 30 days, basically notice, hey, I'm going to see you in court in 30 days. The person in this case would have a 20-day window to decide if they wanted to appeal. They may want to call up the code enforcement officer, hey, I disagree with what you're saying and here's why. Or they may, hey, I'm definitely guilty. It may be come court day, they've taken care of it. Many cases they will have a story, for the judge as to, well, here's what I've done and here's what I've not done, and everyone seems to have a story. And so a lot of times the judge will work with someone and give them more time. In a lot of cases, depending on the situation, it could be, a minimum $1,300 fine. And so when going back to rolling out our property maintenance code, we had a very aggressive stance. And so one of the benefits of that aggressive stance, and the judge was pretty rigid, just to be honest. And so we had some pretty large fines being assessed, and it didn't take long before the word got out within, basically the circles of anyone that may have what I would call a slum property, that these guys are serious. We better get our act together and get it cleaned up before we go before the judge. And the beauty of that is we ended up with a lot of self-compliance. And, of course, that's a huge win for any community. So, again, going through the court process, we like to think we've been pretty successful in this arrangement. One of the things I alluded to earlier when I showed you the swimming pool in the crawl space, and that's actually the building on the right there. And one of the things that a provision that we're allowed to do is an emergency closing. And these are those families, and typically it's going to be a sensitive population, families with children, and if there's an imminent danger, then we have the latitude to declare emergency closing. And I believe we've got some lingo here. Let me scroll forward just a bit. And so kind of the key here, looking at this, the bottom, is once the declaration has been made, we have to have a hearing within 72 hours. And so that's pretty tough. And so if you think about an apartment complex and the process of going through, you can imagine it's certainly tough when you've got that many folks that could be displaced. But again, this is the break glass if necessary. You find something that's really just so bad that you can't imagine letting it go on any longer, and you can't wait. Then again, this is one of those tools that has become available to us. We had an apartment. This is just one local example. So there are real costs involved, and so don't ever let anyone tell you that getting in code enforcement is not going to be a costly proposition, because it is, because one, you're going to have staff time, and good, bad, or indifferent, you're definitely going to have some legal time, and that's just the nature of the beast. But again, and you'll hear me say this over and over, as a community, if you're serious about your community, if you've got the political will to clean it up, these are some of those costs that you're going to have to be willing to take on, whether you're a small town or you're a medium-sized town or a large town. And so this I'll show you some photos here. Hopefully this does not look familiar to anyone that's on the webinar today. It's sort of this is not the area you could think about running across and seeing children growing up in this and enduring some of this. And so it's pretty bad stuff. Again, more electrical violations, and not sure what they were doing with the bathtub, but I don't think I'd want to try that. And so, legal fees, they could be costly. We do try to contain. We try to do as much research with our code guys as possible before we have to rely upon our attorneys. But in a case like this, was it the right thing to do? Of course it was. We don't want to see anybody in harm's way. So another concept I want to talk to you about a little is the concept of this whole cost of vacancy. And so other than you've got a blighted property on a neighborhood, then there's also the economic impact perspective. So simple math here, simply looking at, the cost of a home sitting vacant. And, again, it's just simple math, but those dollars that are being lost or dollars that are not being returned and spent and turned over again within your community. And so I think, as you're thinking about code enforcement, or maybe you're thinking about implementing for the first time, this is one of those areas that you may not normally think about, but working in the economic development side of the business, and as assistant city manager here in Rome, I spend a lot of my time working on economic development, dollars and cents. And so we work hard to try to attract investment to our community. And so this is just one of those areas that can be overlooked. And so I simply mention that to you as a point of reference. So again, I've got some of the legalese here. You may or may not care to read in some of the finer detail. And again, as was stated earlier, webinar will be available for further view. And I'd be happy to share the presentation. I could do that by email later if anyone wants to know some of the more specifics and they want to. Perhaps you want some of the code sections. We'll be happy to put some of those in your hands. So again, we're just talking about unsafe buildings. I won't read you the extent of the detail, but the definition. What is it? Often we think we know it when we see it, but to be able to enter into the legal process, we have had some specific definitions, and those are written in as part of our amendment that again goes back to 2007. 2003 Highland Circle. So probably not one of the better homes within our community. But looking at this is when we talk about the cost, this is quite on the expensive side. And I say that because demolition is going to vary community by community. Here, I neglected to mention, but one of the things about Rome is we operate a joint municipal landfill, and so we operate that as an enterprise fund. And so there are no free tipping fees. And so when the city or when the county, when we do a haul off, we pay tipping fees just like any other customer would. And so that's why you will notice that there are, in this particular example, it goes back to 2008. And so again, looking at what we have spent, added up it's a little over $7,000 on this one example. Again, times are tough. Do we want to spend that on each property? Of course not. But do we have to occasionally? Unfortunately, we do. Another example, you may recognize this as the haunted house on McGee Street. And look at the cost of this one. And so this is literally what I would call the ideal scenario of, hey, Mr. Property Owner, we have codes in place. You're in violation. We want to work with you. What can we do to help you? And by the way, if we have to take you to court, chances are you're going to be on the hook for, it could be as much as $2,600 with the judge, in addition to whatever action you're going to have to ultimately take. And so in this particular case, and again, this is one of those best case scenarios, we had the owner decide to take action themselves. And so total cost to the city, we don't show the man hours that we pay our code enforcement officer because they're going to be getting paid regardless. But in this case, we don't attribute any of that directly to this property. So some of the reasons, some of the excuses, you guys probably, you have probably encountered this. What do you expect for the $350 a month? Or you know how these people are. Or I would do something if they would pay their rent. And it can be a vicious cycle, and so you end up with, and unfortunately in some cases they're what I call slumlords, that they buy bad property, and it is a vicious cycle because they're not gonna invest any money in it. So yes,
and we have received a question.
Yes, shoot.
The question is, how do you have authority to enter private property?
We have authority under our property maintenance code. And so in some cases, we are more, what I would say, we are more available to do some things than our city police department may be in terms of dealing with dilapidated structures.
Okay, thank you.
So, and again, as Corey mentioned earlier, please send in any questions, and if we, again, we'll have, I'm pretty certain we'll have time at the end to open it up. So our advice to the folks that are the wannabe real estate investors, you know, the market's going to fluctuate. There's going to be some low. There's going to be some high risk, short and long term. But you know, we don't encourage these folks to go pick up these good deal properties with the thought of, I'm not going to do anything to it, and it's going to sit there and generate money. And so, you know, at the end of the day, is it the government's job to be involved? Well, no, it's not, but is simply our advice to the those out there that are making those kind of decisions to go and buy. And we're, you know, again, the perception is often reality, and so in our case, we've tried to work with the community at large, but we definitely want the community to know that we can't turn a blind eye, and often that, you know, in our case, we've got to get out and do something. So please don't buy junk and expect to not have to come into compliance. So in this example, pretty good before and after, pretty structurally sound home by and large. And you'll see there's some rubbish in the front yard. There was some of the classic graffiti. You look inside, and it's like, oh, wow. So this is what goes on behind closed doors. And so this is a case to where folks have gone crazy with graffiti. And here you see the after. And so I'll go back. Let me go back just again. Okay, so again, looking on the left, interior, and then this is the after. And so this is a case that where a little hand-holding goes a long way in working with the property owner. There were numerous violations, and this property, I want to think, was probably a 90-day process of just trying to get cooperation, because this was a case where there was a mortgage on the property. Hey, the easy thing to do is I'll just walk away. I'll just walk away. You guys tear it down. I don't want to have any part of it. But in lieu of that, again, through some what I would call some creative hand-holding, we were able to convince the owner and try to help the owner. And so in this case, they ended up reinvesting in this property, fix the property up, and so although they did not make a fortune off of this, it was a break-even scenario. And so I think that certainly in my book it was a win that they were able to walk away. And of course the bigger picture, and why would we be interested in this, is because what was a cancer in an otherwise stable neighborhood has now become you know, one of the best-looking properties on the street. And so it's certainly something that we would deem a win for us. So talk to you a lot about kind of the property maintenance side, the whys of what it looks like, things that are on our list. We do have a Rome-Floyd County land bank, and so land banking has been an on-again, off-again topic. I know there are quite a few around the state now, and there are quite a few communities that are talking about them. So we were one of the early creators, but unfortunately we really just are for whatever reason, our land bank has not grown to full potential. And so our land bank, we're actually dusting off, as I have told the City Commission. And so we've got to come into compliance with the new state law that was passed during the last session. So as late as our last night's City Commission meeting, we reappointed our 2 new members. And for those of you that are not familiar, land banking is really a neat tool that can be available to help with your redevelopment efforts. And so oftentimes when you're dealing in the code business and code enforcement specifically, you're going to have abandoned properties. And the whole goal of the land bank is how to get those abandoned properties back into productive use and back on the tax roll. Land bank has some unique tools that allow that. One of those tools is the abatement of property taxes. And so from the city government perspective, that's not something that we want to see go away as far as taxes, because we obviously need those to function. But from a redevelopment perspective, it is a good deal to take something that's producing nothing to back in generation. Potential for a blight tax, and I will tell you this is something that we have been researching. We have a redevelopment committee internally at the City of Rome, and so the blight tax is simply that. Some of you that may not be familiar, it's where you provide a special assessment to property that is in a state of disrepair. And so, just to give you the hypothetical example, you've got property X, and they have whatever the tax assessor has set that value for that property. You would apply some function of the millage rate. And so, for example, it might be 5 times. So it could be a factor of 5 or maybe a factor of 10 in the blight tax. And so if I'm the owner sitting on that property, I would much rather fix that property up and have to pay an extra fee that the city would then reinvest in the community or into that particular property. There's the vacant property registry. This is something we have also researched. It's not been such an issue for us because by and large, as a community, we've not had a very large foreclosure rate. But in many communities that have looked at the vacant property registry, it's been simply that, to where you have a building, a home that becomes vacant, and the idea here is someone would have to come in and register that with the city. There would be a fee, and we would be able to better keep track of, okay, who owns the property, when did it go vacant, what's the lending institution. And it's amazing how much time you can spend trying to track down who the lenders are. Community improvement districts, or CIDs. Again, a lot of communities have these in place. These have been pretty popular within the metro area. We're just at the threshold of taking a look to see if those may be right for us. Neighborhood enhancement program. This is something I'm pretty excited about that I picked up on at a conference last year. And the city of Cincinnati, Ohio does the neighborhood enhancement program. And so I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. Is they have very active neighborhood associations. And by and large, these associations compete to be chosen for the NEP program. And so what is NEP? So in essence, if you're the community, your neighborhood, let's say you're chosen for 90 days, you're going to be at the top of the list for city services. And so whether it's code enforcement, whether it's policing, whether it's fire, maybe you've just got a question for the mayor. Essentially, the city is going to come out and they're going to set up shop within your community, and you're going to get what I would call a very intensive focus. And the reason I've been very intrigued by that, because we've had a program here in Rome that we call Neighborhood Focus, and it's literally a baby scale of this. And so little did I know that Cincinnati was doing what we're doing, but they're doing it on steroids. So in our case, we go out a week, we may go plant some trees, we may clean up sidewalk, we may do any sort of typical maintenance thing that could have been neglected. But the key is we get the neighbors out, get the neighbors meeting each other, get the neighbors comfortable with the police, whichever officers typically patrol in that zone. At the end of the week, for us, we have a community cookout. And so all the providers, all of our different city services are there. City commissioners are there, and literally grilling hot dogs. And so I'm investigating how do we take that to the greater level, which would be the NEP level that Cincinnati's doing. And so it seems to be a very popular option, and has worked very well for those guys, so much so that their neighborhoods are competing. And so that's just, again, one of those things that we want to look at. So with that, I know I have probably talked your ears off, and maybe there are going to be some questions. And if there are not questions now, I would obviously welcome anything by email. And otherwise, if anyone would like to come to Rome, I'm happy to facilitate a visit to where we could get you face-to-face with our inspections department and kind of show you the ropes of how it works for us.
Sammy, we do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
The first is, how do you handle dilapidation and potential demolition in the historic districts?
Oh, great question. And we do have a very active Historic Preservation Commission. It's rare, I will say, it is rare to have a demolition in a historic neighborhood, But it does happen, and so that's unfortunate. And you know, to be honest with you, I've got a house probably 200 yards from where I'm sitting now. It is on the river, and it is a classic case of where I know that house is going to head toward demolition. The owner, unfortunately, has filed bankruptcy. But in our case, what we do is our Historic Preservation Commission has to approve any demolition, and they also, at the time that they do that, they won't just haphazardly approve. They want to know, well, what are you going to build back, and exactly how is that going to look? And so I don't want to make it seem that it's just that easy, because it's certainly not. And it's certainly rare to have a property, in our case, that has gone to demolition. There's only a handful that I can think of that have been in the historic preservation area that did have to reach demolition. And in those cases, it's a very tough proposition for our preservation committee to approve those. But in our case, when we've had a situation where it's gotten out of hand, or where we're at the end of the rope, they have basically relied upon our professional staff and the recommendation. And so really the challenge there is not so much the tearing it down, is if you got one bad enough to be torn down, you may not have an owner that's capable of producing a replacement, and so that's really where the rubber meets the road. And so in an ideal scenario, you're going to have, here at least, you're going to have approval of what's leaving and the simultaneous approval of what's coming back. And so in a perfect world, that'd be the case. Here, we've not seen much of those, and where we have, they have approved something that's going to be compatible with at least the district.
Thank you. We've received several questions, and we will not have time to answer them all in this session, but we will copy those down, and I'll send them over to Sammy and see if he can provide some.
Yeah, and I was going to ask Corey if I don't know if my email was provided, but I'm happy. Email is a great way to get in touch with me.
Okay. Can you speak a little bit more about the land bank process?
Sure, I'm glad to. So land banking, and I'll give you kind of the example of sort of a snapshot around the state. So in our case, we had a joint land bank with Floyd County, and we had 2 members that were city appointees and 2 members that were county appointees. Within the bylaws, there was basically a hierarchy of what do we want to do? What's the business of the land bank? And the essence of the Rome-Floyd Land Bank was dealing with affordable housing. So in communities where you have an active Habitat for Humanity, they certainly love land banks. And if there's a key of why is a land bank, what's important about it, it's because they can dispose of property in ways that we can't, and we being city or county government. They could basically act as a private developer. They could go out and acquire. They could put together land deals. I mentioned earlier they can abate taxes. And so if you think about it in terms of a redevelopment arm of your community, there's some pretty powerful things that they could do for your community that a city commission, city council, or county just simply can't do under the state statutes that govern how we declare property surplus, we accept sealed bids, or we hold an auction. Well, the land bank, they don't have to do that in their disposition of property. So that's really one of the key ingredients for how they do business. But again, most folks that have done land banking, it does flirt on the affordable or workforce housing side. I will tell you one story. Macon Bibb has probably one of the better land bank agencies in the state. They have a full-time executive director, and her job is literally to get up every day and think about how am I going to make the land bank successful. And one of the keys that I've noticed for their community is everyone there utilizes the land bank for their normal property actions, whether it's their housing authority, whether it had been the city or the county prior to consolidation. They all relied upon the land bank to go out and acquire property. Whereas in our case, we have used it as a tool. And for our land bank, we put together a Hope 6 application, and so we use the land bank to do some processing of property, and that's essentially been it. And so as a tool, it's pretty valuable. If you're serious about redevelopment, it's just a great tool to have in your toolbox.
Okay, thank you. Would you mind just saying your email address so people can?
Yes, I'm glad to. My email is srich, that's S-R-I-C-H, at romega.us.
Okay, we've had a couple of questions about grants. One was, what specific grants have you applied for to use toward clean it or lean it situations?
Well, we haven't, I guess it would be a little bit of a misnomer to say that we've applied specifically for that. What we have is within our community development office, we have the CHIP funds. And so those are funds through that we work obviously very closely with DCA. And because we have those programs available in our community, those have been very vital. We are also an entitlement city, and so for those of you that compete for CDBG funds, you probably know what I'm talking about. So each year we get an allocation from HUD, and so we decide how are we going to, what are we going to do with those funds. And so we have historically always sectioned off some of the money to go towards our housing, and so that's, again, it's been a very popular tool. When I talk about political will, our city commission, it's been one of the very most popular things that they enjoy doing, is because at the end of the day, we have a waiting list. There's a lot of those folks out there that want to tap into some of that repair money, and so I'm glad to help and talk about that. And I have a referral. Our community development director is Miss Becky Fox. And Becky, I'm certainly glad to put you in touch with her. She has administered our programs and could talk to you about all the tips and tricks of things that we have done to be able to go in and not only to repair but to build new construction in some of our redevelopment areas.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sammy, very much for doing this webinar for us. And like I said, I'll be sending you the questions, and we can figure out how the best to respond to those.
Absolutely, Corey. And the other thing I would mention is my phone number is 706-236-4400. And again, you have email. Email is probably the easiest way to get me because I'm usually away from my desk. But we would love to help, and we've got a great team in Rome, and we'd be glad to put you in front of any of them and explain it in an intimate level of detail. So thanks for the opportunity, Corey.
Thank you to our attendees, and remember that this webinar will be posted on the GMA website probably within 2 days or so. Thank you again.
Thank you.